A year ago, I was laid off abruptly, right before the end of my shift. All I got was a cold call and the worst possible news. But yesterday, my former boss reached out to me, not to apologize, but to ask for a favor. They needed me to help recover something crucial. And believe me, it's not for a simple reason. But the real question is, what on earth have they done with that important data all this time? A year ago, I remember vividly the moment when my life was completely disrupted. It was a weekend afternoon, and I had been working for over 8 hours, finishing everything up to end my shift and head home. I thought everything was going as usual, and I only had about 30 minutes left before I could wrap up my day and relax for the weekend. However, that sense of calm was shattered when I received a call from HR. "Can you come to the meeting room for a moment?" The HR manager's voice didn't sound particularly serious, but I felt something was off. I didn't think much of it, as surprise meetings were common at work, but when I entered the meeting room, I immediately sensed something strange. My boss was there, along with others from the team. The heavy silence made the air feel thick. I glanced around and realized I wasn't the only one there. Everyone looked confused, but no one dared to ask anything. Then my boss spoke. "Thank you for all your hard work up until now," he said, his voice suddenly dropping. "But today is your last day here." The room seemed to spin, and everyone's eyes couldn't believe what they had just heard. I couldn't fully comprehend what he said next, only catching words like, "The company will not continue as before, and we are sorry." These words didn't ease my anxiety. On the contrary, they only heightened my fear. Anger hit me immediately. I had worked hard, given so much to the company, and yet they could make such a decision with no prior warning. I wasn't the only one laid off. My entire department was dismissed in the same meeting. I could see a few colleagues stunned, unable to believe that they would lose their jobs after a cold announcement like this. And maybe in that moment, I, like them, didn't know what to do except nod and accept it. After the meeting, I returned to my desk, and the only question that kept spinning in my mind was, why? A question with no answer, and it seemed that there would never be a solution to the anger and disappointment I felt at that moment. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to keep going, no matter how painful it was, because life doesn't wait for anyone. And no matter what, I still had to pay rent, still had to live, even though I didn't know where I would go or what I would do in the coming months. So, I started over from scratch, trying to push aside the sorrow, looking for a new job, and moving forward. But deep down, I could never forget the feeling of being betrayed, abandoned, and the pain I had to endure. Even though I locked it away in a dark corner of my mind, that hurt never truly disappeared. A year later, I had stopped thinking about my old company. The feeling of loss and abandonment had slowly become part of the past, though it still lingered in my dreams late at night. I focused on my new life, looking for a job and starting a new chapter. But then last night, a surprising text popped up on my phone. I was sitting, drinking coffee, relaxing after a long workday, when the screen lit up. The familiar name appeared, former boss. At first, I thought it might have been a wrong number, or maybe they just wanted to check in. But when I opened it, the message left me stunned to the point where I nearly dropped my phone. "Hey, hope everything is going well. I have something I need your help with. It's related to the old company. They're in some trouble and need your assistance. I'd really appreciate it if you could help." A few short words, but enough to freeze me for a moment. I had been laid off abruptly and without mercy, and now they were reaching out to me? I couldn't believe my eyes. A year had passed, everything had changed, and I had come to terms with that. Yet here they were, asking for my help? I couldn't stop the surge of anger that rose inside me. They hadn't thought about me for a year, and now they were asking for my help? But then I realized this could be an opportunity. Money, no matter how frustrating it might be, was still a necessity, and this job might be a way to solve some of the financial issues I had been facing. I replied with a simple question, "What do you need help with?" Immediately, another message came through. My former boss explained that the company had moved to another state, and during the transition they had encountered a serious issue. They had lost all the company's data, including crucial documents related to legal compliance. What they needed was a copy of the old directory, as it contained their compliance records, which they now needed to recover to meet local regulatory requirements. We've searched everywhere, but we can't find any backup of that directory. Can you help us get it back? Everything felt like a bad joke, but I knew one thing for sure. They hadn't thought to back up their data before moving, and now they were facing a major problem. I couldn't understand how a company this big could make such a disastrous mistake, but clearly they needed me. The anger I had felt earlier started to dissipate, replaced by curiosity and a desire to understand what had happened after I left. What had they done with the data over the past year? Why had they let things get this bad? And could I actually help them recover what they had lost? These questions lingered in my mind, and despite my frustration, I couldn't deny that curiosity and the opportunity to earn money made me reconsider. When I received the request for help, I couldn't help but feel confused and frustrated, unable to understand what my old company had been doing for the past year. How could a large company let something as important as their entire data directory be lost so easily? Despite my anger, I knew I couldn't refuse. This opportunity could bring in a substantial amount of money, and after all, they were in a desperate situation, asking me to fix a problem they had created. I decided to get started on the task, but it was clear this wouldn't be easy. They wanted me to recover a directory containing all of the company's compliance documents, from sensitive security files to contracts and financial records. Everything they needed to prove the company had met legal requirements before relocating to the new state. But the issue wasn't about finding the directory, it was the fact that I no longer had any copies of it. Immediately after being laid off, I had deleted all my work files. I no longer had access to the company account, and they had even deleted the account where I'd stored all the important documents. So I started asking myself, could I actually help them? Before proceeding, I needed to gather more information. I called a few former colleagues who were still working at the company to see if they knew anything about backups made before the move. They told me the company had absolutely no backup plans in place during the transition, and that no one had been instructed to store important documents. Everything had been left unprotected. This only made me angrier, knowing that the company hadn't invested in securing their data, which left all of us in this situation. I went back to my old boss's message and asked for any additional information about any data sources they might still have. After a few minutes, I received a call from him. "We know you don't have the copies," he said, his voice weary. "But we really have no choice. If we don't recover these files, we won't be able to operate legally anymore. Can you help us?" At that moment, I realized something. They didn't just need help. They were in a critical situation. What they were asking for wasn't just a job. It was potentially the salvation of their entire company. While I couldn't forgive them for how they treated me a year ago, I couldn't ignore the opportunity in front of me. I decided to do my best to help them, even though I knew it wouldn't be easy. After deciding to help my old company, I knew I was facing a task that wouldn't be easy. But despite the anger and feelings of betrayal, I couldn't turn away from the opportunity to earn a significant amount of money. The problem was, I no longer had any copies of the data, and I had no tools to recover information from a system that I no longer had access to. I began working the next morning. First, I asked my former boss to provide more detailed information about the old system and what they had done over the past year. They told me that all the data had been stored on an online server before the move, but because they didn't have any backups, the data had been deleted when they stopped using my account. Still, they hoped I might find a way to recover some of it. A part of me felt that something wasn't right, but I decided to push forward. I researched data recovery tools I could use and contacted a few tech experts for advice. One of them suggested trying a powerful data recovery software that could access deleted files from servers. However, this tool came at a high cost, and I wasn't sure if it would work. Despite the uncertainty, I decided to give it a try. I spent the money to rent the software and began scanning the servers that my old company still used. After several hours, I began to feel discouraged when I didn't find any promising results. It seemed like all the previous data had vanished. exhaustion and frustration began to take over. Then in the afternoon, just as I was about to give up, the software discovered some hidden files, but they were encrypted and couldn't be accessed. I contacted my former boss to report the situation. "We can't retrieve the data from there," I said. "There might be some files, but they're encrypted, and I can't open them without the decryption key." The feeling of disappointment grew as my boss insisted I try everything I could to break the encryption, as they couldn't afford the penalties for failing to meet compliance requirements. Although I knew that decrypting the files would be an incredibly difficult process, I had no choice but to continue, even though I felt like I was heading down a path with no way out. That night, as I sat staring at the computer screen, everything seemed to be getting more tense. I wasn't just dealing with a complex technological issue, I was facing a legal situation that could impact the future of the company. What I was doing wasn't just about data recovery, it was a battle I hadn't prepared for, and I had no idea if I could win. After a long night battling with data recovery tools, I felt like I was trapped in a game with no way out. The following day, I continued to try and decrypt the files the software had found, but nothing was progressing. Honestly, I had no idea if I could do anything more. Each time I tried to open a new file, I hit another roadblock. This wasn't just physically exhausting, it was mentally draining, as I felt like I was betting everything on this. Their company's future, and possibly my own, depended on successfully recovering these documents. I called my former boss to update him on the situation. His voice on the phone sounded desperate, like he was on the verge of losing everything. "Is there anything else you can do?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "We can't keep going without these files. If not, we'll face serious consequences. Can't you make it easier?" His demand made me feel even more cornered. I had no other option but to push forward, even though I knew the chances of success were slim. I asked him if there were any documents or data related to password protection or previous access rights. He said that everything had been transferred during the company's move, but there were no backups or specific details about access rights that had been deleted. Just as I was feeling utterly stuck, an idea suddenly flashed in my mind. I remembered that once upon a time, I had stored some important information in a backup company account, one I frequently used to access sensitive data. It felt like a flicker of light in the dark, so I decided to try that account again, even though I no longer had access to it. I reached out to the company's IT department, hoping they could grant me access once more. When I called, the person on the other end didn't sound too thrilled, but after explaining the situation, they agreed to look into my request. An hour later, I received a message from IT. They had reinstated my access, but reminded me that I needed to act quickly to avoid legal issues. I logged into the account and began scanning the files I had stored there. To my astonishment, I started finding files I thought were lost forever. Important documents, including contract copies and compliance records, seemed to be intact. However, I also noticed something strange. Some files appeared to have been altered or partially deleted. At that moment, I began to feel that something wasn't right. It seemed like the data wasn't just lost by accident. Someone might have intentionally deleted parts of it. But at that point, I couldn't dwell on that thought too much. Recovering the important files was my top priority. These files could be the only thing that could save the company from serious legal trouble. I decided to keep going with the work, but I could feel that something bigger was waiting for me ahead.